It did not start with yelling. It did not start with a fight or a tell-all meltdown. The most dangerous moment was quiet. Phones stopped ringing. Emails stopped coming. In my opinion, that silence mattered more than any scene that ever aired. Because when a network stops reacting and starts documenting, something has already changed. Ratings no longer matter. Apologies no longer matter. Everything becomes a record. Behind the scenes, allegedly, conversations shifted from storylines to liability, from drama to risk, from what plays well on screen to what could explode off it. Careers that looked loud and unbreakable suddenly felt fragile, frozen, waiting on decisions no one wanted to explain publicly. This is the point where reality television stops being entertainment and starts becoming evidence. There were whispers. Numbers floated quietly. Not confirmed, not denied. 7 figures. Long-term bans. Arrest rumors that never made it on air but would not disappear online either. And the strangest part was not what viewers saw. It was what they never did. No farewell, no closure, no final edit that made sense. In my opinion, the real damage was never meant for the audience. It happened where cameras were not welcome and microphones were turned off. And that raises one unsettling question. If what we saw was already explosive, what happened that was too risky to ever be shown? For a lot of viewers, Andrei and Elizabeth entered the screen like a thunderclap. Loud opinions, sharper tempers, a couple that never walked into a room quietly. From the beginning, their story felt less like a love arc and more like a pressure test. Family dinners turned into battlegrounds. Simple conversations became loyalty checks. And every disagreement somehow circled back to power. Who earns? Who decides? Who owes whom respect? It was chaotic, but it was also familiar in a strange way. Many fans laughed at first because the fights felt exaggerated, almost theatrical. The overprotective family. The stubborn outsider refusing to bend. The awkward moments where no one seemed to listen, but everyone kept talking. It made good television because it felt like a reality show doing exactly what it promised. Messy relationships amplified for entertainment. Andrei was framed as confrontational and unapologetic. Elizabeth was positioned in the middle, balancing marriage on one side and family loyalty on the other. Every season leaned into that tension harder. Louder arguments, bigger blow-ups, more moments designed to make viewers pick sides. And for a long time, it worked. Clips went viral. Debates exploded online. Love them or hate them, people watched. What most viewers never stopped to ask was why this chaos kept getting rewarded instead of corrected. Because every outburst led to more screen time. Every family fight unlocked another episode. Every uncomfortable moment became a teaser for the next week. In my opinion, that pattern matters. Reality television does not just capture behavior. It responds to it. And when conflict brings attention, attention becomes leverage. At first, it is easy to assume this is all editing. Fans often say producers exaggerate tension, splice reactions, heighten drama that already exists. That argument holds some truth. Editing shapes perception. But editing alone does not explain consistency. Season after season, the same dynamics escalated rather than cooled. The same lines were crossed again and again without consequence on screen. Allegedly, this is where early warnings come into the picture. Not public warnings, not dramatic ultimatums, quiet ones. Conversations that happen off camera. Notes taken. Patterns logged. In my opinion, production does not wait for chaos to peak before paying attention. They track it long before audiences notice anything is wrong. When behavior stops being surprising and starts being predictable, it stops being entertainment and starts being a concern. That is the reframe most fans never saw. What looked like spontaneous dysfunction may have already been categorized as a known risk. Not a shock, not an accident, something expected. And when something is expected, it can be managed, monetized, and pushed further. Elizabeth's role became more complicated as seasons passed. Defending, explaining, smoothing over moments that clearly left scars. Loyalty was framed as strength, but it also kept the cycle intact. The family pushed harder. Andrei pushed back louder. The show benefited every time. Chaos was not interrupting the story. It was the story. And for a long time, it paid everyone involved. The real question is not why it kept happening on screen. The real question is how long it had already been happening quietly before viewers realized the tone had changed. Reality television runs on a simple engine that most viewers understand instinctively, even if they never say it out loud. Conflict brings attention. Attention brings airtime. Airtime brings relevance. And relevance becomes leverage. The more a couple dominates the screen, the more power they quietly gain within the system. That power shows up as renewals, spin-offs, forgiveness for behavior that would sideline quieter cast members. In plain terms, when arguments spike ratings, arguments get encouraged. Not scripted, but tolerated. Not instructed, but rewarded. Over time, people learn exactly which buttons keep the cameras close. In my opinion, escalation is not always about losing control. Sometimes it is about keeping it. That incentive structure changes behavior. When explosive moments consistently lead to more visibility, people stop seeing consequences and start seeing patterns. Raise your voice and you get a confessional. Push harder and you get another episode. Walk away calmly and you disappear from the edit. That is not manipulation by producers as much as it is reinforcement by outcome. When chaos works, people lean into it without realizing the cost is being deferred. Allegedly, this is where off-camera escalation becomes relevant. Not in the sense of secret scenes or hidden storylines, but in the way tension follows people after filming wraps. Stress does not reset when cameras stop rolling. In my opinion, unresolved conflict rarely stays contained to the moments audiences see. It leaks into planning calls. It shows up in production schedules. It complicates simple logistics. Importantly, this is not about labeling anyone as good or bad. It is about behavior and response. When the same confrontations repeat across seasons with increasing intensity, tolerance shifts. What once felt edgy becomes expected. What once felt shocking becomes routine. And routine behavior is easier to track than to excuse. This is usually the point where tolerance quietly turns into documentation. Fans often push back here and say editing exaggerates everything, that producers stitch together reactions to make situations feel worse than they were. That argument is fair to a point. Editing absolutely shapes narrative. But editing cannot create shutdowns. It cannot invent legal concern. It cannot manufacture silence where communication once flowed freely. When shows are healthy, even chaotic ones, there is movement. There are negotiations. There are compromises. When something changes, the change is not dramatic. It is procedural. Fewer responses. More formality. Less flexibility. Those shifts do not come from edits. They come from risk assessment. Allegedly, this is when internal notes start mattering. Not accusations. Not judgments. Just patterns. Frequency. Impact. Repetition. In my opinion, production teams are trained to notice when behavior stops being isolated and starts being systemic. That does not mean immediate punishment. It means escalation is no longer entertainment alone. It becomes data. Psychologically, this is where things often go wrong. When someone has been rewarded for intensity, de-escalation feels like loss. Calm feels like invisibility. So pressure increases. Boundaries get tested harder. The system that once amplified behavior now starts protecting itself from it. The most dangerous moment is not the loudest fight. It is the moment the system stops reacting emotionally and starts responding procedurally. Viewers rarely see that pivot, What they notice instead is confusion. Why scenes feel shorter. Why storylines feel clipped. Why familiar faces seem present but distant. That distance is not accidental. It signals a shift from management to containment. In my opinion, the real turning point happens when production no longer believes issues can be handled internally. When conversations stop being about fixes and start being about limits. That moment does not come with a dramatic announcement. It arrives quietly. And once it does, everything that follows becomes harder to reverse. When lawyers enter the room, the volume drops instantly. There is no shouting, no dramatic confrontation, no speeches about growth or redemption. Everything becomes numbers, probabilities, and exposure. In my opinion, this is the moment reality television stops being creative and starts being defensive. Legal teams do not ask who was right. They ask what could go wrong next. They look at patterns, not personalities. They calculate risk the way producers once calculated ratings. Allegedly, once that shift happens, every decision slows down. Filming schedules pause. Contracts get reviewed line by line. Simple approvals that once took minutes start taking weeks. This is where the math replaces the drama. Delays cost money. Reshoots cost more. Extra security adds another layer of expense that never shows up on screen. Insurance premiums rise quietly when unpredictability becomes a theme. Advertisers do not need a scandal to pull back. They only need uncertainty. In my opinion, confidence matters more than controversy when brands decide where to place their money. From the outside, nothing looks explosive. That is the mistake people make. They expect firings to be loud and public. But allegedly, the most effective response is often silence. No announcements, no statements, just fewer appearances. Shorter edits, eventually, none at all. A quiet removal protects the network without feeding the narrative. Public firings create headlines, and headlines invite scrutiny. Scrutiny invites questions lawyers do not want asked. A quiet ban, on the other hand, feels like fading out. It avoids admissions. It avoids confrontation. And it leaves no soundbite to challenge later. This is why the absence feels heavier than a statement ever could. No farewell special. No reunion explanation. No emotional goodbye that offers closure. In my opinion, closure only benefits the audience. Containment benefits the company. Behind the scenes, allegedly, the focus shifts to preventing escalation rather than correcting behavior. Who needs to be present? Who does not? What combinations increase risk? What environments create volatility? These decisions are not moral judgments. They are operational ones. Once lawyers are involved, every appearance becomes a potential liability. This is also when careers quietly freeze. Not ended. Not publicly condemned. Just paused indefinitely. Phone calls stop getting returned. Opportunities dry up without explanation. And because nothing official is said, there is nothing to fight against. No accusation to disprove. No decision to appeal publicly. Emotionally, this is the hardest part. Silence creates its own kind of damage. Humans look for resolution. Even negative resolution feels better than none. But here, there is nothing to react to. Just absence. In my opinion, that kind of ending is more disorienting than any on-screen confrontation. The reframe matters here. This was not punishment. Punishment is loud. Punishment is performative. This was containment. Containment is quiet by design. It minimizes risk. It limits exposure. It reduces the chance that a situation grows beyond control. Containment does not care about fairness. It cares about outcome. Viewers often assume networks act emotionally, responding to outrage or fan pressure. But legal involvement changes incentives completely. Allegedly, decisions are made based on worst-case scenarios, not public opinion. What could happen if this continues? What happens if it does not stop now? After that pivot, the tone of everything changes. Communication becomes formal. Language tightens. Flexibility disappears. There is no room for improvisation because improvisation creates unpredictability. And then comes the silence that follows. No goodbye scenes. No final confessionals. No moment to explain what went wrong or what was learned. Just a gap where a storyline used to be. In my opinion, that silence tells you more than any dramatic firing ever could. When someone disappears without explanation, it usually means the story was no longer safe to tell. And once that realization settles in, a new question takes shape. If what viewers noticed was only the surface, what risk existed beneath it that made silence the safest option of all? Elizabeth is often discussed as if her role is simple. Either a victim trapped between loyalty and pressure, or an enabler who refuses to see what everyone else sees. In my opinion, that framing misses the reality of how emotional bonds actually work, especially under constant public scrutiny. Standing by someone does not always come from denial. Sometimes it comes from fear of collapse. Fear that if one piece falls apart, everything else follows. On screen, Elizabeth looked like a mediator, translating between worlds, smoothing conversations that were already damaged before they started, defending intentions when outcomes kept getting worse. That position is exhausting, and it rarely earns gratitude from either side. Family members feel betrayed, partners feel misunderstood, viewers feel frustrated, yet walking away is not as simple as it looks from the outside. Loyalty feels like strength when the world is pushing in from every direction. This is where the difference between loyalty and enabling becomes painfully blurred. Loyalty is emotional. It is rooted in commitment and shared history. Enabling, however, is behavioral. It happens when defense replaces accountability. In my opinion, Elizabeth was navigating both at once, and the line between them kept shifting as pressure increased. Networks do not assess individuals the way audiences do. They assess systems. Couples are treated as units, not separate narratives. One person's behavior affects the risk profile of the other, regardless of intent. That is not fair in a moral sense, but it is consistent in a corporate one. If one half escalates, the entire unit becomes harder to manage. From the network's perspective, public defense reads very differently than private loyalty. When someone defends behavior publicly, it does not signal support. It signals resistance to correction. In my opinion, that distinction matters more than most viewers realize. Behind the scenes, accountability conversations rely on acknowledgement. Even partial acknowledgement creates room for adjustment. Public denial closes that door. This does not mean Elizabeth was malicious or strategic. It means she was human. When criticism comes from every direction, instincts take over. Protect. Deflect. Stand firm. Admitting fault publicly can feel like betrayal, especially when the person being criticized is also the person you love and rely on. But systems are not emotional. They are procedural. Here's the reversal most people miss. Loyalty strengthens relationships, but it weakens credibility within institutions. What feels like solidarity to a partner can look like non-compliance to a network. In my opinion, that disconnect is one of the quiet tragedies of reality television. Emotional truth and institutional logic rarely align. Elizabeth's defenses may have been sincere, but sincerity does not change impact. Every public statement becomes part of a larger record. Every attempt to explain context can be read as minimizing consequences. Allegedly, this is when patience wears thin, not because of intent, but because of optics. The more consistently someone defends behavior, the harder it becomes to argue that change is possible. Viewers often ask why networks do not separate couples and give individuals a fresh start. The answer is simple and uncomfortable. Separation does not erase association. History follows. Risk follows. And when one partner has been publicly unwavering, the system assumes alignment. Emotionally, this creates a no-win position. Step back and feel disloyal. Step forward and appear unmovable. In my opinion, Elizabeth was trapped in that tension long before viewers started debating her role online. There is empathy here that often gets lost. Loving someone under pressure warps perspective. It narrows options. It convinces you that holding the line is the only way to survive. But the cost of that stance is invisible until it is too late. What protects a relationship can quietly end a career. Elizabeth did not need to be punished for that to happen. She only needed to be seen as unwilling to separate herself from the behavior that created risk. And once that perception forms, systems respond predictably. Not with confrontation, with distance. The hardest part is that none of this comes with a clear moment of realization. No scene where someone says the wrong thing and everything collapses. It happens gradually, through accumulation, through patterns, through defenses that feel necessary in the moment and irreversible in hindsight. And that leaves one lingering discomfort. If loyalty was the reason she stayed standing, was it also the reason the door quietly closed behind her? The room shifted the second those words landed. Not yelling, not tears, just a sentence that hung in the air and changed how everyone breathed. Lauren, Alex, Elizabeth, all in one space, cameras rolling, and suddenly, the story stopped being about messy friendships and started touching something heavier. On screen, Elizabeth voiced concern about Alex's behavior toward Lauren. She framed it as how it felt to her, not a legal claim. But the reaction was instant. Faces tightened. The energy dropped. Everyone knew this was different. This was the moment fun drama stopped being safe drama. Up until then, conflict lived in familiar territory, raised voices, hurt feelings, old grudges. Networks know how to manage those. But the second words like verbal abuse enter the conversation, the math changes. Not emotionally, logistically. Abuse allegations do not stay contained within a scene. They trigger standards, policies, lawyers, and internal alarms. Even when phrased as concern, even when intent feels protective. On screen, the moment looked messy and uncomfortable. Online, it exploded. Some viewers praised Elizabeth for speaking up. Others accused her of crossing a line. What matters here is not choosing a side. It is understanding why this type of statement changes the room for everyone involved. There is a gap most viewers miss between perspective and proof. Perspective is personal experience. Proof is verification. Reality television lives in perspective. Courts live in proof. Networks operate in the space between, where risk sits. When a cast member voices an abuse concern on camera, the network cannot ignore it, even if no evidence follows. Silence after that point looks like negligence. Once the concern is spoken, the responsibility shifts away from the speaker. Intent matters morally. Impact matters operationally. Elizabeth may have believed she was protecting Lauren. Many viewers agreed. Speaking up feels like the right thing in human terms. The problem is that television turns private concern into public record. And public record carries consequences far beyond the moment. From a psychology angle, saying something out loud often feels like relief. You stop holding it alone. You share the burden. But in public spaces, especially filmed ones, that release transfers weight onto everyone else. The accused, the network, the production team, advertisers, the audience. Control slips away fast. Lauren and Alex were suddenly pulled into a narrative neither had prepared for. Body language changed, defensiveness rose. Confusion followed, not because guilt was established, but because gravity entered the room. You could see people recalibrating in real time. This is where reality television stops being flexible. Some viewers argue that speaking up always matters, no matter the platform. That silence protects harm. That airing concerns creates accountability. That argument holds moral weight. It also collides with the limits of entertainment formats. A reunion stage is not built for careful investigation. It is built for confrontation and closure within minutes. Networks fear two outcomes equally: ignoring a concern or mishandling it publicly. Both carry risk. Once the allegation aired, there was no clean path forward. Editing could not undo it. Context could not fully contain it. The footage existed. Elizabeth lost control of the narrative the second the words left her mouth. Lauren and Alex did too. Viewers filled gaps. Social media amplified fragments. Allegations, even unproven ones, travel faster than clarifications. After the episode aired, nothing belonged to the cast anymore. This is the quiet lesson. Saying something publicly feels brave. It also hands the story to forces that do not care about nuance. Intent fades. Clips circulate. Perception hardens. Networks retreat into silence to reduce exposure. And once that happens, there is no rewind. No clarification episode. No reset. The room changed, and everyone inside it felt the door close at the same time. But after the cameras stopped rolling, the silence hit harder than any argument ever could. Everyone who had been part of the storm seemed to step back, leaving space that felt suddenly empty. Elizabeth, once a visible voice in the chaos, found herself on the outside of conversations that mattered. What viewers saw as drama was now her reality, walking alone through the aftermath of moments she thought would define her as brave, not weary. The pattern had become predictable. Confrontation, escalation, apology, repeat. The audience learned to expect chaos from her. And when that's the case, even serious concerns start to fade into background noise. When chaos becomes expected, credibility begins to erode. Fans started splitting into camps. Some applauded her for calling things out, for showing honesty under pressure. Others labeled her overreactive, dramatic, or inconsistent. Social media commentary amplified the division. Clips were dissected, opinions hardened, and nuance disappeared. Every defensive loop on screen added to the impression that Elizabeth's voice carried less weight. Even valid points seemed tangled in the history of walk-offs, raised voices, and repeating arguments. Once behavior patterns are cemented in the audience's mind, perception overshadows intent. By this point, friends and co-stars were also pulling back. Alliances frayed. Trust became conditional. In a system that thrives on conflict for ratings, personal bonds often take a backseat. When someone repeatedly escalates situations, the people around them start to avoid involvement. Not out of cruelty, but self-preservation. The network, the crew, the cast, everyone starts calculating risk. And for Elizabeth, standing in the center of this storm meant fewer allies, more isolation, and limited support even when she raised legitimate concerns. Walking alone becomes the unintended consequence of being visible too often. Even casual viewers could sense the loneliness that followed. Outside of the flare-ups, there were moments of quiet that revealed how exhausting it was to be caught in perpetual scrutiny. Social media outrage, online debates, and memes kept the storm alive long after cameras left. Every clip, every replay, reminded her that perception was now stronger than reality. Friends' absence in private moments, subtle avoidance on set, and the fading of once close bonds created a weight that was invisible to fans, but felt in every interaction. The social fallout was just as real as any legal or professional consequence. The psychological pattern is clear. Repetition creates fatigue. Consistency in conflict erodes trust. Once a cast member becomes associated with drama, their interventions, concerns, or calls for accountability are filtered through a lens of expectation. The audience and co-stars alike stop giving the benefit of the doubt. Every warning, every cautionary word is measured against a history of heightened reactions. And in Elizabeth's case, the audience had learned to brace for the next incident, which diminished the impact of her serious concerns. Even the loudest, most urgent warning can lose power if it comes from a source long defined by chaos. This also explains why online commentary became so polarizing. One viewer might see honesty, another might see exaggeration. One fan perceives bravery, another sees instability. The repetition of conflict created a social fog where clarity could not survive. Private friends, who once offered counsel, stepped back to avoid being drawn into public drama. Connections thinned. Loneliness grew. The audience never sees the quiet moments where cast members process the emotional fallout. But those moments exist, and they leave a mark. By the time new episodes aired, Elizabeth's influence over the story had waned. The words she spoke still mattered, but the power to shape outcomes had shifted. Social perception, editing, and accumulated history meant that even when she spoke truth, it was layered beneath a blanket of expectation. Every walk-off, every defensive response, every heated exchange created a filter through which the audience and her peers now interpreted her. When conflict becomes identity, even valid concerns become background noise. The emotional weight of being isolated, even while under public scrutiny, compounded over time. Fame and visibility collided with fatigue and misunderstanding. Cast members like Elizabeth were left navigating the consequences of a system that rewards spectacle, punishes persistence, and amplifies division. The social fallout was not a single event. It was a slow erosion, a series of small but cumulative effects that changed relationships, fractured trust, and left a lingering sense of solitude that no camera could capture. The aftermath of all the conflict left a quiet emptiness that cameras rarely capture. Careers that had once seemed unstoppable suddenly stalled. Opportunities vanished, not with a bang, but with a subtle, almost imperceptible fade. Friends who had once been constants drifted away, unable or unwilling to navigate the tension that lingered long after the episodes ended. Families felt the strain too, caught between loyalty, embarrassment, and the very public attention their loved ones had drawn. Sometimes the loudest battles leave the most silence behind. No one walked away feeling victorious. Fans argued online, but inside the bubble of reality TV, the real losses were human. Jobs were affected. Reputations, carefully built over years, became fragile. For those in the orbit of the drama, even a single misstep could ripple into months of complication. Unlike typical scandals that burn bright and fade quickly, this tension carried a weight that lingered, a constant reminder of how much the system and the audience can demand from those in the spotlight. Relationships fractured quietly. Allies became distant observers, uncertain how to respond without becoming targets themselves. The emotional toll was cumulative. Nights spent thinking about what could have been, moments of regret, and private disappointments replaced the adrenaline of on-camera drama. Every public argument and edited confrontation added layers to the isolation. Even a single wrong move could tip the balance between connection and distance. It wasn't about punishment or revenge. The network, the cast, and the audience had no interest in assigning blame. This was a cost of participation, a human price for living life under constant observation. The deeper shock is how real people, real families, and real careers were affected, while viewers consumed a curated version of the story, unaware of the behind-the-scenes consequences. In many ways, the weight of this situation feels heavier than past scandals because the fallout is both personal and systemic, touching every part of the cast's world. By the time the dust settled, the visible drama was gone, but the damage lingered. Careers remained frozen, relationships were strained, and trust became a rare commodity. And for the audience, the shocking spectacles they had watched were only the tip of the iceberg. Beneath every fight, every accusation, every tear, was a story of human cost, one that no editing room could truly mask. Behind every headline, someone pays a price that no ratings or applause can ever justify. The ripple effects of the Andrei and Elizabeth situation reached far beyond a single couple. Inside TLC, conversations reportedly shifted from damage control to prevention. Producers and executives began reviewing how behavior on and off camera was handled, considering faster legal involvement and stricter rules for escalation. What was once tolerated, because it drew ratings, was now seen as too risky. The calculus had changed, and the network had to weigh spectacle against liability. Future cast members are likely watching this quietly, taking mental notes on what could end a career overnight. Some changes, according to insiders, included faster intervention when conflicts escalated, more careful monitoring of behavior, and a lower tolerance for repeated incidents. In other words, actions that might have once earned airtime were now likely to trigger warnings, documentation, and potential bans. The goal was simple: prevent another high-risk situation from spiraling into legal and reputational damage. This shift suggests a franchise learning from its own history, choosing caution where chaos once ruled. The impact goes beyond rules. It sends a message to every prospective participant. Behavior matters, loyalty can carry consequences, and speaking up, or staying silent, can define your future on the show. Networks are aware that even a single incident can spark lawsuits, advertiser concerns, and fan uproar. This recalibration isn't about censoring drama, but about containing it before it destroys careers. The stakes for future stars have never been higher, and everyone knows it. For viewers, the implications are subtle, but significant. Episodes may still be dramatic, confrontations may still make headlines, but the cracks behind the curtain are now more carefully managed. Where chaos once fueled storytelling, careful oversight may now shape narratives. And, for the franchise itself, this moment may serve as a turning point, a test of how far it is willing to go to protect both its brand and its talent. The lessons are clear. Unchecked behavior can end opportunities, loyalty can backfire, and networks are willing to act quietly to contain risks. TLC at this crossroads signals a shift not just for Andrei and Elizabeth, but for the entire 90-Day Fiancé universe. Fans may never see the full extent of these changes, but the consequences will ripple through every season to come. Every next move by a cast member is under a microscope, and one misstep could rewrite their story before it even airs. By now, it's clear that what unfolded with Andrei and Elizabeth was never about a single explosive scene or one fight caught on camera. The question we opened with, how can a couple go from primetime stars to facing lawsuits, alleged bans, and arrest rumors almost overnight, has an answer rooted in slow, quiet escalation. This didn't happen in a single episode or a dramatic reunion. It was the accumulation of tolerated behavior, repeated warnings, and off-camera moments that never made it to air. Fans might see chaos and think it's spontaneous, but networks see patterns, risks, and liabilities long before headlines do. Production reportedly documented concerns meticulously, tracked incidents, and calculated potential fallout. Ratings were valuable, but only until risk outweighed profit. By the time lawyers stepped in, it wasn't about punishment, it was about containment. Silence became the network's tool, a way to protect itself while the careers of those involved quietly froze. For Elizabeth, defending behavior publicly may have felt loyal, but to the system, it looked like resistance. For Andrei, aggression translated into operational risk. And for the audience, much of what they saw was only the tip of the iceberg. The lesson here is subtle, but powerful. Reality TV can end careers without a single headline or dramatic firing. What appears entertaining can have serious, irreversible consequences behind the scenes. Relationships fracture, trust dissolves, and opportunities vanish long before viewers fully understand what happened. This is the shadow side of a franchise that thrives on confrontation and drama. Even after the cameras stop rolling, the impact lingers, quiet, invisible, and often permanent. Looking forward, the ripple effects are already shaping the franchise. Rules are tighter, oversight is faster, and tolerance for repeated risk is lower. Cast members know the consequences, and networks are silently recalibrating how far they will go to protect both their talent and their brand. Episodes may remain dramatic, but the cracks behind the curtain are carefully managed, and no one wants a repeat of the Andrei and Elizabeth situation. As we step back from this story, it's worth asking, which moments will quietly change careers next? Which scenes, unseen by the public, will determine who stays in the spotlight and who disappears without warning? The next chapter in 90 Day Fiancé drama isn't about screaming fights or viral clips. It's about accountability, silence, and the hidden costs of fame. The next story will reveal how a single allegation, quietly handled, can ripple through relationships, reputations, and even entire seasons. What we learned from Andrei and Elizabeth is both cautionary and inevitable. In reality TV, not every ending is broadcast. Not every consequence is visible. And sometimes the most dramatic moments are the ones you never see. The next video will dive into another situation where behavior, silence, and delayed accountability collide. And the fallout will shock fans in ways they never imagined. One wrong move off camera, and even the brightest stars can vanish quietly from the franchise forever.